sci-fi. That seems to be a bit of a focus for Theologicon this year, which is great, but also looking at the distinctions and the overlap between sci-fi and fantasy fiction as well. So let me just introduce you first of all to our writers here. We've got Ben Morton. Say hello there, Ben. Let me tell you a bit about Ben Morton, or Morton Benning is his pen name. Go figure, you can explain that one during your conversation. Ben is he's an author, a visual artist, a tabletop gamer, an adjunct lecturer, again here at Tabor in speculative fiction, an all-round lover of fantasy and sci-fi, and he's the author of Playing God. Hold it up, Ben. And The Tale of Allah Thimble Spade and Other Such Nonsense. That's only just come out, hasn't it?
Yes.
Both books for sale out here, published by Stone Table Books, if you're interested. As well as the creator of Morton's English Fictionary.
I didn't bring one of those today.
That's a dictionary of made-up words.
Yes.
Very entertaining. He lives in Adelaide with his wife, his 2 daughters now, correct? Yep. And you can find him on Facebook at Facebook/Morton Benning. Next to Ben, we have Ian. Ian Miller comes from New South Wales. You've come over from?
Yeah, I'm here from Sydney.
From Sydney, yeah, Sydney-based writer. Good, thank you, Ian. Drawing from his broad university background in chemistry, physics, mathematics, theology and education, Ian brings to life alternate realities in his fiction, worlds that call into question the very nature of humanity. He's currently finishing book 3 of the Emissary of the Oppressed trilogy. He's a popular speaker, lives in Sydney with his wife, Christine, and you can visit him at ianmiller.net.au. The book that...
I'll show the books.
Yeah, a couple of books.
That's 1, that's 2.
Those are the first 2 in the trilogy?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. We'll hear a bit more about them shortly. How's the third one coming along?
The third one is written.
Written?
And so the editor gets it this week, and then we work on a timeline for production of that one.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. These are both ready for Christmas.
Fantastic. On the end, Claire Bellberg, everybody. Claire writes what she calls speculative realism. Wow. This world with the margins of space and time stretched. I like the sound of that. Her first novel, The Golden Hour, do you have that with you, Claire? The Golden Hour explores that liminal space between life and death. Your work in progress, does that have a working title, your work in progress? Or are we not allowed to know? Huh? Ever Now. Okay, wonderful. You describe it as a dead-end timeline, or a time spur, correct? Yeah, okay, we might hear some more about what that is. With a degree in psychology, as well as creative writing, incidentally, Claire writes to understand how the material, the psychological and the supernatural intersect. She lives with her husband, youngest offspring in the Adelaide Hills, where she loves to indulge her passion for native plants and birds. And you can find Claire's writing at The Character Forge, clairebellberg.wordpress.com. Is that correct? Excellent. They are our 3 writers in a nutshell. I could tell you about their books, but I think it's probably better coming from them. Do you think, Pete?
Yeah, we'll sort of go across that as we go along.
No worries. I'll hand you over, and you can take us from here.
All right. How you doing?
Good, thanks. Oh, thank you.
Just want to take a deep breath, because most of you just walked straight in and just sat down, oh, let's go again. Is that right? I will introduce myself then, since he didn't. Pete, also talk on the radio, and I also have a book and author, that one, there you go, it's called Suburban Tales, and it's weird. It's officially the designation. So I'm sort of basically going to be posing some questions to you guys, and for you guys to sort of throw questions around as well. And particularly since you've been here for most of them, you've already had a couple of sessions, I'd be really interested to get your thoughts on what you've already heard, how that ties into what you guys are doing. So primarily, I wanted to start by looking at the relationship between sci-fi and fantasy. Well, first of all, is there one? Yes. Hands up, who wants to speak? Go on. Which is what?
Okay, when I teach speculative fiction, which is a broad umbrella for both categories as well as horror and spiritual fiction. And sci-fi and fantasy are very similar in that they really are just fiction that has weirdness. That's kind of the simplest way to put it. But the two appeal to different angles for where the weirdness comes from and why it exists and how it works. So if you have in a story here is a unicorn. In a fantasy story, the reader goes, a unicorn, that's like a magical horse with a horn. Awesome, we just continue on with the story. And they're fine with that because it's a magical thing. We just accept that there's magic in this world, there are unicorns, we're good. But if you go to a science fiction story and you say, there is a unicorn, the first thing the reader is going is it a mutated horse? Is it scientifically, genetically created? Does it come from another planet?
It's a robot.
Yeah, or is it a robot unicorn?
That's interesting, yeah.
We want to know why. Like, is there a scientific reason that fits with our understanding of how the world works? That explains why it exists.
You could actually use it to assess whether what you're reading, watching, whatever, is sci-fi or fantasy. I mean, you wouldn't have, if a unicorn suddenly appeared in the middle of Star Wars, you'd sort of go, that just doesn't work.
Unless you're watching the show Lost.
Yeah, that didn't, nothing worked in it.
Science fiction, no.
Yeah.
Fantasy, no.
All right.
No. I could not pin it down, and that was driving me nuts all the way through because I really wanted it to just pick a genre and stay with it.
Claire?
So can I ask, why does the distinction matter then, Ben?
I think it actually has mostly to do with the taste of the audience, really.
Yeah.
Some audience members are happy to go with, let's have a book with magic and stuff in it, and other audiences are, so I really want to feel like I can believe.
So it's a marketing definition, really.
Sure. Yeah.
I think, Ian?
Oh, I'm just trying to...
So are you with us?
No, I'm just off exploring. I'm in a different dimension.
Give us a call when you get back.
Well, because for me, I want to bring us, in this trilogy, I wanted to bring a spirituality into it.
Right.
And that throws a different complexity on it again. So I have my main character. There is a God figure, and you can do that in sci-fi fantasy. You can have God figures. Sci-fi, you tend to explain who that God figure is. It's an alien of some form.
Mm-hmm.
Fantasy, it's actually allowed to be a God figure.
Mm-hmm.
So I have one group of people who have the God figure as God,
Yeah.
and they worship it.
Yeah.
But another character in it who is like, no, that doesn't make sense in my worldview. This is an alien, something that is truly foreign to anything that we've seen before. And so I've, in mine, I try and blur the distinction a little bit.
I think it's interesting because both of us actually with our books have done that, where we've done science fiction and fantasy at the same time in a way that you really shouldn't be able to. Because it's very hard to market if you say this book is science fiction and kind of fantasy too, because people who read fantasy typically want it to be fantasy, and people who read sci-fi typically want it to be sci-fi. We've actually done both. I did it and you did it as well. My world is, if you think of a Tolkien style magical reality sort of fantasy world with dragons and wizards and all that kind of stuff, but it's all computer generated. They live inside of a computer. And their god is just the guy who runs stuff. He's just a guy from our world. He's 16 years old, he's a jerk. And I decided that it would be really fun to have this idea of incarnation. So in the reality we understand, Christ chose to come and be amongst us. In their world, God was usurped by his answering machine and was deposited in his world and forced to live amongst his people. He doesn't want to be there, he doesn't want to save anybody except himself. It's like a reverse incarnation idea. But it was purposely, I have God in my world. I have no problem with the idea that there is God, but all of the magic you see in the world is all just computer code, except for God.
Ben, you talk about the unicorn and people just go, oh, we accept it's a unicorn. I want to throw at you, looking at the image on your chest there, that sci-fi just accept. There's a sonic screwdriver that can scan for alien life.
Yep.
We don't need to know the science. We just accept that that is a part of this worldview in the sci-fi world. How is that different from your distinction about the unicorn? Or a magic wand? Or
No, I think the difference is that we call it a sonic screwdriver and not a magic wand. I think that's really the difference.
It's true. It's the same with a lot of Star Trek. One of the things that there's a lot of work been done on the science of Star Trek. and a lot of scientists now, real scientists with real jobs, are actually trying to replicate some of the work of a replicator of Star Trek. And so there is that sense in the world that a sonic screwdriver is capable of doing. And this is actually, you come back to what we understand about God, and since culturally we try to get rid of God with the whole death of God philosophy and all that sort of stuff, that's when God started moving out of every single piece of literature and art anyway. I mean, most art before the Renaissance was church. The church made all the art, did all the art, paid for everything. When that stopped, then God started finding his way out of it. God is constantly coming back in because we just always are writing God into everything. But science took over. So science has this thing called the TWAD, which is the truth will out device. And you see it every time someone talks about the Large Hadron Collider, is we don't have the answer yet, we just need to spend another $1 trillion and we will find the truth. The truth will come out. So a sonic screwdriver is a truth will out device. We don't know how it works, but that's just because we're too inexperienced and we haven't done the science yet. Science will make a sonic screwdriver work, culturally.
Science
that's why it works.
Forcing to midichlorians.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where maybe eventually some of the things that we consider fantastical might turn out to actually be science.
I think that, and that's a really interesting point. This is why I think you guys are really helpful for this. I think there is the two streams, the difference between the two streams is I think sci-fi, science in the world, and not talking fictional, but science as it is, a vast amount of it, is about trying to replace God, or at least finding things that we want to control. And the Large Hadron Collider is a perfect example. The search for dark matter, the fact that scientists have decided that 70% of the universe can't be seen, therefore it must be something that we'll just find, instead of saying, could be God. So science is trying to find ways around that. And I think science fiction encapsulates that. Science fiction seems to be the storytelling way of understanding why there isn't a God. Fantasy seems to be the opposite. There seems to be a sense of fantasy where it's a way of understanding that the world has something beyond our understanding, and that's cool. And I think that's part of what we like about fantasy, is there's a wow factor that we don't have to try and explain. What do you think?
It seems that no matter how much we might separate religion out from things, humans need to have a sense that there's a purpose, there's a meaning, and if we're not going to find it in religion, then we're going to try and find it in something else. I think that's why science fiction and fantasy continue to have a very strong following.
Yeah.
There's got to be some sense behind it, some purpose, some destination, and we look for it. And so we look for it in these sort of stories.
I'd probably throw into there too that spirituality is a part of our humanity. And I am your classic science trained person, we're, at the end of the day, we want practical answers to how the world operates. But deep within our humanity is a question: why does it operate? And science actually can't answer the question why. Science answers the questions how. But there was a previous day we used to think it answered the question why, but it doesn't answer why. And so as soon as you come to the why, you necessarily come into metaphysics. And it's like, you watch an episode of Voyager, and you'll have an American Indian who has his spirituality, and there'll be the Vulcan spirituality, and there'll be the Klingon spirituality about afterlife. None of them, in those stories, none of them will we believe. They can't put anything concrete on it. They're in a completely science fiction world, but they can't answer something pragmatically. It comes back to, because there is something within humanity. Now, fantasy can just go straight to the why, and it can be as wild and as bizarre as you want it to be. Science fiction is probably science fiction for me is a genre that explores what humanity looks like. It just takes me into a foreign world with foreign technology, and having divorced me from this world, I can then let the author introduce me to heart issues about my world. Because I think actually that's the beauty of sci-fi and fantasy, is that they talk about the real world.
There was a really interesting, I don't know, did anyone watch Babylon 5? Yeah,
Nerds!
Yeah,
Sorry.
there was a hilarious episode that they had this thing where they were celebrating the different religions of all these different cultures, and when they came to the Earth religion, show us the Earth religion, and I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. What are they going to do? And what they did was they just got a whole line of people from every single possible denomination of every faith they could think of, and just went and shook hands with each one of them, and they introduced them by their title and shook their hand. And that was all they got of the Earth culture, of Earth religion. All the other people, they had a religion for their people, and Earth just had this massive long line of
ill-defined, And
it's like, I felt like it's so lacking in our culture. We don't have our culture. But then
I think that probably speaks more to poor storytelling than anything, and gutless storytelling.
When sci-fi writers create a culture, like the Klingons or something like that, they give them a religion
and a faith.
They give them a culture, not like a planet full of cultures. They give them a single. It's like they belong to just a people group, a homogenous people group.
But I think that's, if you look at, I think if people look at Christians, they see a culture, they see a faith, they see one thing. And the fact that we know it's all massively broken up and all different pieces and all that sort of stuff is different. So maybe from the outside, we look the same. Claire, you had your hand up. Did you need to loo or?
I take a different approach from Ian. He puts you in a different world to explore essentially humanity from the perspective of that other world. Whereas I go into it from this world and say, what happens if your real life suddenly has some surreal thing that's not normal in this life, and look at how that impacts the character's perspective on their humanity.
Yeah.
So you can do it from different directions.
Yeah, I did the same thing. That whale is a priest who solves murders. Because he sees things. He sees things that people don't see.
Yeah, I have 3 people in a locked room.
Yeah.
That's a weird room.
And it's not Saw.
And
They're not chained to the sink. Just quickly, I just want to come back to the point Ian was making there. But just quickly, in here, who loves, reads, enjoys fantasy and or sci-fi? Who both? Right? And prefers sci-fi? And prefers fantasy. So why prefer fantasy?
I think for me, fantasy often builds a more elaborate world. So I like the inclusion of gods and culture. And it's not that sci-fi doesn't do that. I think like Doctor Who's a great example of a very elaborate universe. But I like the more physical aspect of fantasy. I like that exploration of. So there's a series of books by David Eddings, and he really goes into the mechanics of faith and like the will and the word and all those aspects. I find that fantasy is a very good genre for exploring those things in depth.
Yeah.
For me personally.
Yeah. All right. And why sci-fi?
I think because I guess it's about the meaning aspect. So for me, the meaning has to be unpacked within things that I don't have to suspend as much disbelief.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel that more meaning can be connected to my own sense of person in an unfolding open universe.
Cool. Yeah, I think it's an interesting. And as we were talking about this panel and the discussion, I was thinking about how closely related they are, and that thing between one being about getting rid of God and one being about sort of letting God be. I think the two total opposites almost of that are Thor and Iron Man. You know, where Thor is pure fantasy, Iron Man is pure science, and yet, you know, they're both together in the same kingdom. I thought that was kind of interesting.
You have Captain America in the middle of that saying, there is only one God, and he doesn't dress like that.
Yeah. One, I want to throw at you guys something that I've actually been researching of late, which is fictive geographies. This is where a whole bunch of scientists who are studying the Earth and geography and how we use it. These are geographical scientists, and they're trying to work out how to understand the planet in terms of its solid, you know, the scientific aspect. And one of the things that they're saying is that scientists who are doing real science need to read fiction, because if you wanted to look at Sydney for some reason, don't know why, you could tell everything about it. You could get the maps, you could get the population things, you could work out what the soil was made of, you could do all of that. What you couldn't understand is what it felt like, and you couldn't understand what it meant. For that, you would have to go to fiction. Yes. So they're now actually doing a lot of research where, like, for example, I went to Russia over Christmas, and I read books of fiction from Russia to find out how people lived, what it actually meant. I wanted to take you back to something you said earlier, which was that the market loves the idea that, you know, people want these types of books because that's what the market does. But you don't write for the market, I suspect. I suspect that you sit down and write this stuff because it's what you love writing. Yeah. And I think any good author does that. An author who has passion on the page writes what they love writing. So in terms of a fictive geography, what do you say about what it means and what it feels? How important is that to what you're writing?
I think that's really the centre of what you're writing, is because writing a story, you're not writing about the world, you're writing about people. All of fiction writing is, here is a person, and here is their struggle to do whatever they want to do, or achieve whatever they want to achieve, or survive, or whatever they need to do. It's them going through that, and it's them interacting with people around them, and so that's really what it is. It's what it feels like. It's the reason why you write. Everything else around that is just there to create the story. It's like that thing about we've been getting a lot of zombie stuff lately, and the point of zombie movies and zombie shows is not the zombies. No one cares about zombies really. It's the people who have to survive the zombies. Those are the ones we care about. The zombies are just an environmental factor that makes their life hard.
So there's a great book waiting to be written there from the zombie.
Yeah, I think someone tried that already. It wasn't very good.
There's actually they are now coming out. There was a movie a while ago with Billy Connolly, where he's a dog fighter.
Okay.
And he's actually they were using them as servants and stuff.
Okay.
Sorry. Anyway, carry on. I have another point about zombies in a sec.
If I could say that, I think the writing process for me is just total creativity.
Explain creativity.
In
4 words or less. Yeah. How do you mean total creativity? I mean,
it's art.
Right.
It's creating a world. It's creating.
It's making.
It's taking, like, some people in their mind, they fantasize, which is not a healthy thing, but necessarily.
What?
I could tell you some people. That's not
Okay.
because they fantasize the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But there is a creative aspect of it's just like, it doesn't have to look like the real world. What you're doing is you're creating something, and I think personally as a Christian, it's reflective of the fact that we're made in the image of someone who creates.
Yeah. That's true.
So I want my world to be able to be seen and felt and experienced,
As if it were real.
as if it's real.
Yeah.
I have an added complexity in all of it, in that because of my science background and because of my relationship with Jesus, it has to work scientifically.
Yeah.
So I don't actually want a true fantasy, because I want this to be actually. I want someone to read this book and think, you know, could this actually be true?
So what you're looking for is an internal and an external logic that both fed.
So it has to work for that.
Yeah.
I wanted to write it in such a way, though, that I wanted to write to me before I became a Christian. I became a Christian in my 20s.
Yeah.
And I wanted to write to me in such a way that I wouldn't realise that I was reading a parable.
Mm.
And so I wanted it to read like it would just be a great story, but it would be telling me things about the sin nature, the effect of the fall, who God really is, without it preaching to me.
Yeah.
Because it would look like sci-fi. So there for me is what I mean by creativity. It's like you're trying to reproduce something that is totally fiction, but in a way that you're doing, like you're telling a story.
Yeah.
And whether or not people like it or not, kind of like at the end of the day for a writer, I don't think that actually even matters. I mean, we want
For your publisher, it does.
Yeah, so it's awesome when people want to read it, and it's awesome when you hear the feedback.
Yeah.
But you actually wrote it for you, not for the market.
Exactly. I think that's true. All right. Now, we will have to wrap up very shortly, so we'll get some questions in a moment. So just whilst you ponder what questions you may have, I just want to pick up on one thing that said, because the whole point of this whole event of the Theologicon is basically get thinking outside of what we have previously. You mentioned the zombie thing, and I should just mention that I actually have given that quite a bit of thought after talking to my mother, who got... she's supposed to be dead. She got spinal myomas and cancer all up her spine about 6 years ago, and they gave her 3 months to live. She's still alive and loving it. She's a counsellor, a psychologist, and actually set up the counselling course here at Tabor many, many years ago. So she has spent her years learning how to counsel grief and how to counsel families and all that sort of stuff. She said the really weird thing was, as soon as they found this new technology, which is the DNA splicing technology that are now used to treat a lot of cancers, 6 years ago she was one of the first people to get that, and she's still going. I know many of you know Nick Hawkes, who's also a very fine author. Has same thing. He's now fine. Cancer they've really kicked it. He had a few months to live, and I would love to do more research, but I have a sneaking suspicion that that's one of the reasons the zombie stories have become so popular and so prominent in the last 10 to 15 years. We have a whole generation who is supposed to have died and hasn't. And we haven't learned how to counsel people to live after that. And I think that that's one of those cultural things that's actually coming through in our storytelling, that we're actually seeing a lot of zombie stories because people can relate to them. It's like, oh, huh. And the zombie stories have changed greatly.
Antiretroviral, same thing.
Yeah, well, exactly. It came out of the AIDS era, out of that first AIDS thing came a lot of the zombie stories, and when they became bigger, and then they became zombie stories that were good zombie stories. Things like iZombie, which was a really fun sort of thing. Those sorts of more fun zombie stories came out, and I think that's part of what happens with any fiction, that we use it to look at how the world's changing, and you don't normally see it straight up. We were talking just before about the dreaded Doctor, and how much we're very keen to, or I'm particularly very keen to do some work and go through and pinpoint where through that series they deliberately excised God out of the universe in order to fit the Doctor in, because the Doctor is Jesus. Yep. And quite often it's blatantly obvious that, so therefore you can't have a God in that world. And it's interesting because the new series makes the world more here than the old series did, so it's quite a problem.
On that one.
Yeah.
My 10-year-old daughter has told me that the reason that the Doctor keeps regenerating is because he needs more than one life to realise there is a God that he has to.
Guys are sitting there going, oh, all right, one more chance. Right. Who's got some questions? Anything you want to throw in? Any observations even that you'd like to?
Oh, just one question about, like, with world building, how do you not get, as fun as all that stuff is, how do you not get bogged down in that? Because it's so easy to say, I need to get this exactly right, so people don't...
How does it not become a Minecraft game?
9 years I've been trying to write a dystopia.
I think we need to ask Ian, because it took less time than ours did. Mine's 20 years coming, so...
Mine's 9 years and it's just been shelved for the moment.
The answer is editors are brutal. that actually is.
So that's like maybe 2/3 larger or something?
This book here was probably going to be about nearly twice that size.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and editors are brutal.
Mm.
Yeah. And it's a very humbling thing to give your work that is your creative art. And you've given it to somebody who this is their world. Do you like it? Just like, you know, it's like, and when they come back and they're brutal, they want to slash, 30,000 words from you, and it's just like, yeah, but that was like, and one editor said to me, you can tell the quality of a work by the quality of the bits that were cut out of it.
Yeah.
And that's why you get the director's cut on movies, because they actually cut out some really good scenes, and that's the quality of the work is what gets cut out. But that would be my answer to
The thing with world building is that you can easily get sucked in a rabbit hole of just, I've got to understand how the money works, I've got to understand the government works.
Yeah.
And the thing is, you do kind of have to understand a little bit of that, but the point of the story is not that.
Yes.
The point of the story is the characters and what they're doing and where they're going. And all that stuff that you're building is stuff that's only there to support how this works.
Yeah.
And some of it is important.
Yes.
I discovered partway through my process, I was having a chat with Dean Cornish. We had this little kind of writers gathering and we were just chatting about stuff. And in my world, I have people who learn to be wizards. They have to be wealthy and sponsored to become wizards. They go to wizard school. Anyone can do it if you can afford to do it. And I had this idea of like this whole kind of, there's the hierarchy of the wizards, the people who can use magic, and everybody else is not allowed to use magic and not allowed to learn magic. And he said, what happens to people who failed their exams? I'm like, I never thought of that. That means I've got a whole stack of people who went to wizard school because they could afford to, but then didn't actually pass. They know how to use magic, but they're not legally allowed to do it.
They now work in Silicon Valley.
And so what I've got now...
Set up Facebook!
Suddenly I have black market magic.
Ah, okay.
I have people who are not allowed to use magic who want to because it will get them money. And then I had I've got now an insult in my world for someone who will call somebody else a chocolate vendor. Because in their world, chocolate is on the periodic table because it's computer generated, so anything can be on there. And so they can make chocolate by magic. It doesn't exist in their world for any other reason except you can use magic to make it happen. So, but wizards would never stoop to selling chocolate because that's just a very common thing to do. So the only people who sell chocolate are selling it by doing black market magic and then selling it. So to be a chocolate vendor is actually a really horrible insult to somebody. And this all came about because somebody asked me this question about my world building that I hadn't thought of, but it created an entire middle tier of people who work with wizards but can't use magic.
So in the world building process, you're going first of all into the full-on creative.
Yes.
I can do this, I can do this, what about this, and thinking about everything, and then you have to pull back to the other side, going, how much is this necessary for the story?
Yeah.
And that's the important bit.
Yeah.
And as you look at,
You're swinging between both.
yeah, and vast amount of world building isn't really much world building so much as world bending, I suspect, where you look at Lord of the Rings, where the trees are still trees and the grass is still green and the hills are still hills. You know, you don't have to reframe. Even Dune, Dune was just sand. How easy was that? You know?
And in fact, if you were to change everything, then it wouldn't work.
It wouldn't, no. There'd be no connection. Yeah.
That's right, it's going to have a lot.
So maybe the best thing is just to get some ideas of what you want, write the first draft and make little annotations along the way about, I may need to look into that further.
Well, I think what you both said, and I think what you've alluded to, the changes aren't necessarily in the landscape, in the world, as in the physical world. They're more in the way that we operate within it, aren't they? Is it?
Or you can take them right out of the landscape.
Yeah. So that was the other point is I know people who've started writing fantasy because they couldn't be bothered doing the research. It's easy to make up my own world, damn it.
There's so much more research that way.
Yeah.
How it works now.
It's actually harder to start from scratch.
Yeah.
there's something you've sort of touched on a bit, and I know it gets used a lot. So, Ben, you talked about having conversations with other people. You talked about talking with your editor and so forth. And I know a lot of writers have a writers group that they bounce their ideas on to refine their world and so forth. What do you guys use, particularly in that sci-fi and genre, in terms of bouncing ideas, given they're your ideas and they're not being had by anyone else?
Yeah. Well, I'm part of a writers group, which is called Literati. Claire's that part of that group as well. And we all we bring in stuff and chat about what we're doing a lot. One of the things that I picked up is that my idea for my story is only going to be my idea for my story. Even if I share it with a dozen people, they're not going to write my book.
Yeah.
They're not going to write my book. They might write their book. They
Yeah.
might have similar ideas, but my book is what I create out of this idea. And if, I mean, the truth be told, if I was to give this entire premise from this book to somebody else and they were going to write that idea and it was really good, I think they deserve that book better than me. They can do a better job of it than me, by all means, but it won't be the same.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we find in Literati regularly, between looking at each other's major works, we do shorter exercises, and you wouldn't believe how different the stories turn out from this group of people who meet together regularly. They know how each other thinks in many ways. It doesn't matter, those stories end up being wildly different.
Just what we're working on just at the moment is coming out shortly is a collection of stories that are they're Bible stories but told by the animals that are present in the story. And all of us have had a bash at writing these different stories and think, okay, well you get a group of maybe a dozen people in the room at the time and say, go and do that. And what we come back with is 3 takes on, like, was it Jonah got 3? Or one of them got 3 different versions. I can't think which one it was. But 3 different people wrote the same.
Yes, I think Jonah has
There's like one version from the perspective of the worm and one from the perspective of the whale. What was the other one? Was it another whale one? I can't remember. I've lost track of them. But it's like so vastly different ideas and approaches and styles.
Thank you, Ben.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ben. Ian Miller, thank you very much. Claire Bellberg, thank you very much. And Ben Morton, or Morton Benning. Yes. The book's actually for sale out there as well, as is mine. All right.
Get a signed one.
Thank you very much.